Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you may applause. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And it's an honor to be here with these two wonderful, courageous people and all of you. Today is the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. So I want to sing a song that honors that legacy and the legacy of freedom everywhere. One fine summer day, 1963, the great march for civil rights took on Washington, D.C. They marched for freedom, they marched for jobs, they marched for dignity. They marched for the conscience of a nation, for justice and equality. 250,000 gathered there in Washington that day. Hear the Reverend Dr. King lift his voice and say, I have a dream, and we witnessed history. Now it's up to all of us to carry a legacy. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. From the streets of Birmingham to that Nobel Prize he won, Reverend King let freedom ring, shine his light for everyone. Now people anywhere who've been denied their rights find vision, strength, and inspiration to carry on the fight. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. Can't keep a baby from needing to be touched and loved. You can't keep the trees from reaching for the sky above. And you can't stop the river from rolling to the sea. And you can't keep the people from the hunger to be free. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. Shall be free. Shall be free, free to be who you wanna be, and free to see the dreams you want to see. All people shall be free.
Stephen Fisk, everyone. This program tonight is really sponsored by a whole group of synagogues in the Valley who want to bring wonderful people like the rabbi and Abu Ali Awad here to the Valley so that we can engage in conversation with them and learn with them. And that includes us here at VBS, Adat Ariel, Temple Aliyah, and Leo Beck, and the Shalom Institute, and especially our partners over at Temple Kol Tikva. I'd like to introduce Rabbi John Hanish, who's going to share a few words of Torah with us first.
So I was asked to put tonight's program into context with a drash. And then I looked at this week's Torah portion, and I saw it was all about skin diseases, and I thought this couldn't be more perfect. So let me ask you, how many of you have ever had anything that made you itch? Or twitch? Or anything on your skin? All right. Well, the Torah talks about this phenomenon. It talks about sara'at. It talks about skin infections, things that make us itch. And so often when we study this Torah portion, we think it's really about real disease. But the Torah tells us that if we see this on our skin, we go to our priest. Not to our doctor, but to our priest. I'm guessing they might have had a few medical people back in the times of the Exodus. And so the rabbis say, well, why do you go to a priest for this? And they explain, or at least the Talmud explains, it's because it's a spiritual illness. And the Talmud goes on to explain it's a spiritual illness that affects you when you speak words of Lashon Hara. When you speak ill words, something happens to your skin. And our best example of this occurs, in the story of Miriam and Aaron when they speak out against Moses. What happens? They stand in front of the entire community of Israel, and they first accuse Moses of marrying a Cushite woman. And then they say, guess what? We're prophets just like Moses, elevating themselves. God doesn't like this. God shows up. God says, you shouldn't have done that. And then God departs. And what happens to Miriam? She has sara'at. And she suffers from this 7 days. And for 7 days, she has to wait outside of the camp away from everyone else because of the words she has spoken. And when you have sara'at, you're supposed to wait outside the community for 7 days and then be re-inspected. But during these 7 days, you're supposed to yell out something like, I'm infected, I'm infected. But if you think about what these words really mean, what they're saying is, well, I've said something terrible to someone else. Stay away from me because you don't want to hear the terrible things I might say to you. And for a week, you have to admit to anyone outside of that camp, anyone else who has been sent outside for whatever reason, that you're not worthy to be listened to. Rashi asks, why do you have to separate yourself? Why is this person separated from all the other people who are already outside of camp? And Rashi goes on to explain it's because the person's words either separated a man from his wife, a man from his friend, a man from his community, or a community from a community. So when we speak words, sometimes it could show up as a skin infection, as a twitch, as some physical ailment, and it can affect others. So words can destroy, but words can also create, as we know from Genesis, what happens? God says things like, let there be light, and then what happens? There's light. Words can create, words can also destroy. So often we forget that we need to listen to each other instead of just yelling at each other. So often we forget that we need to have conversation. And we have true conversation. What happens? We're healing our bodies. And we have false conversations. We're hurting our souls and the souls of others. So I wanted to conclude this drash with a blessing. God, may we avoid Lashon Hara so we don't become diseased, so that we don't back ourselves into corners where we are unable to hear holy words. May we be open to hearing words and speaking words that create peace and community, because learning how to live as a community means learning how to communicate with others. And finally, may our lives be filled with listening to and speaking only good words, words of true communication. And together we say, Amen.
It's my pleasure now in welcoming Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger to come and share his story, to talk about Organization Roots, which is a indigenous Israeli and Palestinian initiative for nonviolence and for transformation. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger to the podium.
How could it be that for 33 years of my life, I've lived in an area where there are 9 Palestinians for each Israeli, and I'd never met even one Palestinian? How could that be? Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for having us in your synagogue. It was on a Thursday night, about 5 months ago, 10 p.m., I was closing down my computer before going to sleep, and I looked one last time at the news, and I saw the headline, Eitam and Nama Hankin were brutally gunned down in their car with their little kids in the back seat. And I screamed. I ran upstairs to my wife and I woke her up, and we cried together. I've known Eitam since he was born. 30 years ago, I met the family, his father, Rabbi Yehuda Hankin, his mother, Rabbanit Hannah Hankin. We've studied together. We were colleagues. And the next day, instead of preparing for Shabbat, Friday morning, we were at the funeral. We together lowered his body and her body, they were both 30 years old, into the grave. And next week, of course, my wife and I were at the Shiva, and we cried. Look, I'm coming to you from a community that's bleeding. We've seen a lot of violence, a lot of death in the past few months. Ali and I were sitting at the Root Center that we've created a few months ago, and we heard the shots. We heard the shots, and it wasn't too long after that I learned that Rabbi Yaakov Don, my neighbor, was dead. And I was at the Shiva in the coming days. And it was only a few weeks ago that Michal Fruman, the daughter of one of our activists, Hadassah Fruman, the widow of Rabbi Menachem Fruman, was knifed and injured in the store she was working, Tekoa, the settlement that she lives in. And you know, these aren't the only examples. People are afraid and people are angry. People are wounded inside. And it's really, really hard, even for Ali and I, it's hard for us to bring to you hope when the situation seems so bleak and so dark. But our words, nevertheless, we're sure that you'll hear them, we'll hear your questions, and together we will come out of here with a light, with a little glimmer of light, thinking and hoping and knowing that the future could be better. I'm going to introduce myself with 3 labels. I'm a Jew, I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. When I say that I'm a Jew, well, just about everyone in the audience is Jewish. You know what I mean, but I'm going to tell you a bit about my personal identity as a Jew. I'll begin and say that the Passover Seder is coming. We say at the Seder, B'chol dor v'dor, hayav adam le'rot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, one must see himself as if he personally went out of Egypt. So at the Passover Seder, we're not just remembering slavery and freedom, we are reliving it. We're remembering what it was like when we were there. We're trying to create that consciousness that we're not just people born in the 20th and 21st centuries. We've been around for 3,000 years because all of the links in the chain of Jewish history are part of who I am, part of who we are. My birth certificate says I was born in 1957, but I wasn't. Just like all of you here today, I was born when God called out to Abraham and said, Lech lecha, told Abraham and Sarah to leave their land and go to the promised land, to the land that I will show you. It's part of our consciousness, our expanded collective consciousness as Jews, that at all the stage of Jewish history, it's part of us and we were there. And I especially remember when God told Abraham that your descendants will be as the stars in the sky and as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore. And to those descendants I will give this land, the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, as an eternal inheritance. Part of our consciousness is that we are a people, not just a religion, but a people, a nation that's always been connected to that particular piece of real estate in the Middle East, the land of Israel. And when I move on from talking about myself as a Jew to myself as a Zionist, well, for me, a Zionist is someone, I know it's my own personal definition, you might have different definitions. A Zionist is a Jew that understands that at the end of the 19th century, throughout the 20th and the 21st, that the time has come for the Jewish people to reconsummate our connection to our ancient land. You know that for the past 2,000 years we've been in exile, and we've been hoping and praying and yearning and crying, when will the day come when we can come back? And you probably also know that our exile hasn't been just a geographical exile, it's been a spiritual exile. That our Judaism, to a certain degree, is one of just holding on, marching in place, treading water, until the day comes when we can completely fulfill the Jewish vision in a land of our own. And the day has come. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island. I wasn't born in Israel, but when I was 18, I picked up my bags and I made Aliyah. I went to Israel because I wanted to be part of the fulfillment of the dream of 2,000 years, the fulfillment of the visions of the prophets that one day the Jewish people will be back in our land, an independent state. And I knew that for 2,000 years, the movie of the Jewish people was on hold and nothing was happening. And now the button had just been pressed that the movie is playing again, and I wanted not only to see the movie, I wanted to be a major character in the movie. And today, anyone who lives in the land of Israel is part of the continuing saga. They're shooting us in real time. I meant shooting in the sense of movies. And it's really powerful. It's really, really powerful. That's what I mean when I say that I'm a Zionist. And when I say that I'm a settler, I know that for some people it sounds like a political statement, even a radical, extremist statement. I'm going to make it even worse. Not only am I a settler, but I describe the place where I live as Judah and Samaria. I don't describe it as the West Bank. I don't describe it as occupied territory. I don't describe it as Palestinian territory. I describe it as Judah and Samaria. So what do I mean? So we look at the map. The white area there, north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem, that's what's called the West Bank. That's what I call Judah and Samaria. Well, why do I live there? I live there for the historical continuity. Why do I call it Judah and Samaria? I call it that for the historical continuity because during most of the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in our land, we didn't live in Tel Aviv. We didn't live on the Mediterranean coast. Now, that's part of the promised land. It's part of the land of Israel. It's part of the state of Israel. But Jewish history was born, and the Jewish people matured. And all of our life in the land was in the central mountain range, north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem. That is the biblical heartland. That's where Abraham was and not in Tel Aviv. That's where Joshua was and not in Haifa. That's where the second temple community lived and not in Nahariya. That's where the Maccabean battles took place and not in Herzliya. If you want to be where Jewish history began and continued, you should be in Judah and Samaria. And I call it that, I said because of the historical continuity, because the Bible calls it Judah and Samaria. Samaria was the Jewish kingdom north of Jerusalem, and Judah was the kingdom south of Jerusalem, the kingdom that was centered on the tribe of Judah. That was their biblical inheritance. So I'm just calling it what our forefathers called it, because I'm living there because our forefathers lived there. I want to tell you that a lot of my friends and neighbors have wrinkled Bibles that are missing pages. And it's not because we're disrespectful. It's because the place we learn the Bible is not merely in the classroom. It's outside. You put your Bible in the backpack, it gets a little wrinkled, you walk out there, you open the pages. This is where Abraham walked. This is where the battle of David and Goliath took place. This is where we today are writing the next page in biblical history. It's really, really powerful. Just for one example, where I live is a 5-minute walk from something called Derech Avot, the Patriarch's Way. It's a north-south axis going from Megiddo in the north all the way down to Beersheba in the south. And it runs right through my backyard, basically. It was the Roman road 2,000 years ago, meaning it was the Canaanite road 3,000 years ago, meaning it was the road that Abraham walked upon with Isaac on the way to Akedat Yitzchak, to the binding of Isaac, from Beersheba to Jerusalem, Mount Moriah, and it's that path they walked on the way back to Hebron after Isaac was miraculously saved. And on that same path, where Abraham had walked many times, there are ancient mikvaot, ancient ritual baths that were carved in limestone 2,000 years during the Second Temple period that our forefathers bathed in on the way, on the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to worship in the Holy Temple on Passover, and Sukkot and Shavuot. So from my perspective, there's no place with more Jewish meaning and more Jewish potential than to live in Judah, where I live. And my sense is that the strength and the righteousness, the beauty and the power of that story, that's my identity, has blinded me all of my life to another truth that I just didn't see. I was so wrapped up in the Jewish narrative that I was blinded to the fact that there are other people living where I live. I didn't see the Palestinians, not as individuals and certainly not as a national collective. You know, psychologists say that over 90% of the sensual data that comes into our ears and our eyes just goes in one side and out the other, because we're not prepared cognitively to absorb it, to process it. And I was not prepared to see the Palestinians. They weren't part of my story, my narrative. They were part of the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background. And I want to tell you a story about how bad it was for me. I was in my car over a year ago with 2 Protestant pastors from the states that wanted to see the fulfillment of biblical prophecy in the Holy Land, how we're making the land come to life and how the crops are growing and the trees are sprouting in the Jewish settlements of Judah and Samaria. We were driving around, I was showing them. I had 2 empty places in the car to sit. I picked up the hitchhiker. Let him off, I picked up a second hitchhiker. And when I let the second hitchhiker off, Bob said to me, he said, "Hanan, you're such a nice guy. You pick up hitchhikers. We don't do that in Texas." And I said to him, "Bob, yeah, we pick up hitchhikers around here. We feel a sense of brotherhood. We all have the same vision. And I pick up every person who puts out his finger." And by the minute I finished that sentence, I knew that I was lying. I was lying to Bob, and I was lying to myself. And I actually said to Bob, "Bob, I can't believe what just happened." Something in my consciousness was revealed, that I'm equating human being with Jew. There's lots of Palestinians out there that need rides. I never would have thought to pick one up. And at the same time I said I pick up every person that puts out his finger. How could I have said that? How could I have thought that? And I want to tell you another story. This happened just 5 months ago. There's a girl in Alon Shvut where I live in Judah, half-hour south of Jerusalem, friend of my youngest daughter, 27 years old, has lived in a lone shvut for her whole life. She heard about the wonderful work that Ali and I are doing and others in Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation, and she said she wants to hear about it. She came over, I talked to her for about half an hour, and at the end of our conversation, she said, "That sounds great, I want to join, I want to volunteer." And I said to her, "Fine, that's wonderful. Why don't you call Muhammad? I'll give you his phone number. He's in Beit Umar, and get together and do this project that I have for you." And she said to me, "What is Beit Umar?" And now I'm going to tell you what Beit Umar is. Beit Umar is a thriving Palestinian city of 20,000 inhabitants that's a 5-minute drive from where this girl grew up and spent her whole life. Can you imagine living 27 years with 20,000 people down the road and you never heard of the name of the city? It's not just that she asked me, "Where is Beit Umar?" She said, "What is Beit Umar?" And I'm not blaming her. I'm blaming me. I'm blaming us. I'm blaming the society and the environment in which you can grow up and not know that there are human beings right down the road. It shouldn't be like that. And I want to tell you another story. The background is like this. We live, Palestinians and Israelis, in Judah and Samaria, in the West Bank, right on top of each other with no contact. You drive on the road and you see the other through the windshield. And you know it's them because they have different colored license plates than us. But you have no idea who they are. We're so close and so far away. We speak different languages. We live in different towns and villages. We have different school systems, different municipalities, different legal systems. I live under Israeli law. They live under military law. Different media, newspaper, television, radio. What I read and hear, they don't read and hear and see. In other words, we literally live in different worlds, different interpretations of the news. We even live in different time zones because the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government don't coordinate when we go in and out of daylight savings time. So the person right down the road might be in a different time zone than you. So we live so close together, but we're full of ignorance of the other, and ignorance means stereotypes and suspicion and misunderstandings and prejudice. And of course, given the violence that we're suffering from acutely in the past 6 months, but actually for years and decades, of course there's going to be hatred and anger, resentment, and lots of fear. Lots of fear. And that brings me to my next story. Because not too long ago, perhaps a year and a half, a Palestinian family that lives right outside the gate of a lone shvut where I live put up a sign on the road that said, Mishtelet HaShalom, in Hebrew, meaning peace nursery, selling potted plants and gardening implements. So my wife and I needed a certain plant for a corner of the living room, and I said to my wife, "Why don't you go and get the plant that we need?" And the strangest thing happened. My wife did what I suggested. But I was surprised she went, not just because she's my wife, but because most Israelis, including my wife, would never be caught dead in a Palestinian nursery. But something happened. She forgot herself and she went. She came back after half an hour and told me that she got there, walked into the nursery. The owner took her, just the two of them, into the hothouse, showed her the plant. She took what she wanted. They walked out together, passing a few Palestinians, my wife said, sitting and eating and smoking and drink and speaking Arabic. My wife paid. She told me, got in the car, came home, here's the plant. And then she said that that was one of the most frightening experiences of her life. "What do you think they could have done to me?" she said. I barely got out of there by the skin of my teeth. And then she added, speaking about herself, how stupid I was to go there. And I remember exactly how this was. I was looking into my wife's eyes, and I had no idea what to say to her. Because I knew what I wanted to say and couldn't say. I wanted to say, Ay Allah, you got what you wanted. It was convenient. Nothing happened. What are you afraid of? But I know that fear is irrational. And nothing I could say would calm her down. She was traumatized. That's the way we live. And 2 years and 2 months ago, my life began to change. I got an email from a Protestant pastor in Western Virginia who heard that I was looking to meet Palestinians. He had heard about it on Facebook, heard about me. And he said, I can help you. He said he comes to the Holy Land twice a year, meets Palestinians, meets Israeli settlers, and introduces them to each other. So he came in January 2014 to the Holy Land, sat in my living room, heard my story, and he said, Hanan, next Thursday afternoon, here's the place to go. Thursday afternoon rolled around. It was late in the afternoon. I didn't tell my wife where I was going until I put my hand on the doorknob of the front door. And she said, where are you going? I said, to meet Palestinians. She said, are you crazy? Don't go, it's dangerous. And I went anyway, and I walked 20 minutes through the Palestinian fields and orchards. My heart was pounding, I was afraid, didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I came to this clearing, this field, surrounded by a stone fence, and I peered in, and I saw something that as a religious person, I'd have to call a miracle. Something that I never saw before, that can't happen where we come from. I saw 20 Palestinians, approximately, and 20 Israeli settlers having a party, talking to each other, eating. So I walk in, and I see this woman. She's in brown from head to toe. I can see only her face. I walk up and say hello in English. And she says, hello. We talked about the weather, something like that, for a minute. Then I said to her, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And she said, I can't believe I'm talking to you. We don't talk to settlers. And we kept talking. And then she showed me her son, introduced me to Yazin, 17 years old. I shake hands with Yazin, and he's wearing a windbreaker that says Seeds of Peace. Seeds of Peace. I remember saying to myself, where did he find that jacket? It couldn't be his, because Palestinians don't know the word peace. Then I said to myself, if he knew what it said, he probably wouldn't be willing to wear it. And then Yazin proceeds to tell me about the summer that he spent in Maine, United States, in the framework of the Seeds of Peace camp, meeting Israelis and other Palestinians who've been taken from the conflict zone for exercises in reconciliation and understanding the other. He told me he has Israeli friends, and he wants to dedicate his life to making peace between the two peoples. I really couldn't believe what I was hearing. And then he shows me right next to him standing his father, Jamal. So Jamal tells me they're from Beit Umar. That's the same Beit Umar I mentioned 5 minutes ago. And I'm going to tell you a few of the many things that ran through my mind when he told me that they're from Beit Umar. So my wife and I and our 4 kids, when the kids were really small 30 years ago, we used to live in Karmeit Sur. Karmeit Sur then was a small settlement of 21 families, 21, that was right abutting Beit Umar. This is about a 5-10 minute drive south of where I live today in Alon Shvut. We used to live right on the fence. And there were Palestinian families living on the other side of the fence in Beit Umar. And I remember during the first Intifada, Palestinian kids used to throw rocks at our kids over the fence. And I remember also that I'd come home late at night, sometimes from work. I would drive off the main road to the access road to Karmeit Sur and encounter a roadblock, big stones, boulders in the middle of the road. Have to get out and move them to the side to bring the car through. And I was afraid I'd be ambushed from the side of the road. That's what the people in Beit Umar do. And I also remembered that 30 years ago, like I said, when our kids were younger, well, this doesn't happen in your homes, but in our homes, sometimes the parents used to get angry at the kids and really yell at them. And when my wife really lost her cool, she'd yell at our kids and say, "Go to Beit Umar." If you need an English translation, go to hell. Go to hell. And now I'm meeting a family from hell. And they're human beings. On a certain level, I couldn't believe what I was hearing from them, that I was talking to them. And then Jamal looks at me and he says, "Hanan, you know, when our kids see someone with a big kippah like yours, they start to cry." I say, "What do they cry about?" And he says, "Well, it's the beard." I said, "What's wrong with my beard?" He said, "Hanan, you don't understand? You people with those big kippot and those long beards and the tzitzit hanging from your pants, well, you all carry submachine guns and kill our kids. That's why they're afraid. That's why they cry." And I didn't know how he could have so little tact as to talk like that. We just met each other 10 minutes ago. And there was a long, long silence. And that silence was one of the most fortunate things that ever happened to me, because I was just thinking. And a light bulb went off in my brain. And I said to myself that I think for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And I remembered that 30 years ago, when we used to live in Karmei Tzor, no one owned pistols in those days. And we walked outside in the fields to feel the land of Israel under our feet, to experience the Bible. We always would walk around with guns, with big guns, with Uzis. And I said to myself, how does it look to a little Palestinian kid that these strange-looking people are walking through the fields and they're all carrying guns? And I got it. I got it. And then the party went on and we sat around in a circle. One of the Israelis described to the Palestinians what it's like to be a Jew. What is our connection to this land? That it's the land of the Bible for us. And then one of the Palestinians, Ali Abu Awad, the convener of that get-together, he got up and he talked without rancor, without hate. He described what it's like to grow up in Beit Umar as a refugee. And he described the difficulties of living under Israeli occupation. Did you say occupation? Never in my life had I heard someone use that word face to face. I'd read it in the newspaper. They use that word in the United Nations. And I heard on the radio that the European countries are condemning the Israeli occupation. But never in my life had I met someone that told me he was living under Israeli occupation, under my occupation. And I had no idea what he's talking about. At least I thought I had no idea. Because I'm not an occupier. I'm a Jew who's come back to the Jewish homeland, building our nation after 2,000 years of exile, fulfilling the visions of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah. After the Holocaust, what could be more just than recreating the Jewish state? And now someone's telling me he's living under my occupation. And then Ali described a little bit of lack of building rights and lack of water, no freedom of movement, living under the thumb of the army. And it sounded really bad. And I had no idea where this occupation is and where this suffering is. I'd never seen it, never heard about it. It was really offensive to hear, actually. And it was grating. And he told the story of his history, 1948, becoming refugees, 67 refugees again, first intifada, second intifada. And I heard him using the building blocks of my history to tell a different story, one I never heard before. Really challenging, offensive. But there was nothing he said that I could prove and get up and say, "You're lying." And I went home really, really confused. And for weeks and months on end, every once in a while I'd pace back in my study and try and figure out how I put this together, because I took it serious. I just couldn't slough it off. This was a human being who talked to me and described his truth and his suffering. And it was in contradiction to my truth. And it was challenging the foundation of my identity. But I had to grapple with it. I went back and I met Ali, talked to him again. I talked to other Israelis who had talked to Palestinians. I started reading. One day, I went to my computer, let's say just for fun, and I typed in Israeli occupation of Palestine. And I came to all these leftist websites that a good, orthodox, rightist Jew like me should never be caught dead reading. And I read them. I really read them. I read a lot of them over the course of weeks. And a good deal of what I read was hateful, directed against me, the settlers, as the source of all evil in the Middle East. Acerbic. Some of it I said is not true. But some of it I realized to be true, even though it was directed against me. And clearly what allowed me to absorb some of what I read was the fact that a few months before I had met a Palestinian, I'd met a human being. The human contact is what cracked open the window of my soul to start to examine more and more deeply my identity and how it fits with another identity. There were days in which I felt I had to pick up my stomach from the floor of my study because I was so nauseous. I was literally sick by struggling with these identities, with these stories. And over the course of a number of months, I came to a place in which I remembered the words of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, the first chief rabbi of the reconstituted settlement in the land of Israel. And Rabbi Cook wrote on the basis of Jewish mysticism and Hasidut that there's a spark of truth everywhere. In every person, every language, every culture, every religion, there's a shard of truth. And our task as Jews is to gather the sparks, to bring more and more truths into our spiritual consciousness. And Rav Kook implicitly asks himself, if everything is true, if there's a spark of truth everywhere, is there such a thing as falsehood? Is there anything that's false? And Rav Kook answers that there is such a thing as falsehood. Falsehood is partial truth masquerading as complete truth. All truths are partial, even my truth, even what I most deeply believe in. And to the degree, so I said to myself, that I only knew my truth for 33 years of living in a lone shvut, to that degree that I was living in darkness, living in falsehood. And my job is to try to expand my soul and include the Palestinian truth together with my own truth. And my truth is no less true today. I'm no less a Zionist, a Jew, a rabbi, than I was in the past, but I've tried to add into my identity another level, and that's really hard. And someone asked me earlier to tell you a certain story, so I'm going to tell it. I don't always tell this story, but not more than a few months, it was 7 months after Ali and I had our first encounter, we went on our first tour of the United States speaking together. And the very last day of the tour, we were going from one church to another church. I was sitting in the back of the car. The pastor was driving. Ali was in the front seat. And I started to cry. I remember exactly how I felt. And Ali turned to me and said, Hanan, why are you crying? And I said, because I'm no longer sure who I am. I had heard myself speaking to that audience, and I heard lines from Ali's speech coming out of my mouth, just like I had heard lines from my speech coming out of his mouth. In other words, our identities were, to a certain degree, merging. And I said to myself, how am I still who I am? Am I someone else? Like the ground is falling out. Where is my bedrock? So I'm no longer nauseous, and I know who I am, but I'm still a work in progress. We have to always go through that process of expanding ourselves to understanding and absorbing more and more truths, as difficult as it is. And the last thing I'll say is this. I began to realize it's not enough to go on a spiritual journey. It's not enough to open your heart to the truth of the other. You have to do something about it. And I began to realize that I have been, most of my life, living out my truth at the expense of the Palestinian people. It's me, and it's my community, and it's many, many of us. I believe that our Jewish story is true, but our tragedy, our truth, our triumph has been the tragedy of the Palestinian people. And it continues, the tragedy continues. We have to find a way, I have to find a way to live out my Jewish, Zionist, settler identity in a fashion that doesn't trample on the dignity and on the rights of another people. And the work we're here to tell you about tonight in Roots, Shorashim Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation, is my way of trying to live out my truth in a fashion that makes room for the Palestinian people on that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Always he makes it hard, you know. Always he make it hard. First of all, I would like to thank you for having us. I'm delighted and honored to be here. And I think for the last few years I have been to many synagogues, more than mosques in my life. So I can take the mic. Okay. No, it doesn't matter. I will take it. Don't worry. Even when I flew through Ben Gurion, you know, Palestinians are not allowed to fly through Ben Gurion. We go to Amman, to Jordan, and we fly from there. And sometimes it takes us 2 days just to get to the airplane. When I flew from Ben Gurion, that was the first time or the second time we traveled. Hanan gave me an envelope. This envelope has our itinerary and all of that stuff for the airplane. I don't know why, but I think he cared about me. And in that envelope, there was a kippah. Okay? I put it in my bag. And I came to the security in the Ben Gurion airport. And I gave my passport to that lady. And the minute she saw I'm Palestinian, she took me aside, as usual. And she started opening my bag. And she took the envelope. And she took the kippah. And she started looking at the kippah and at my passport. And me. She was so confused. Then I look at her and I start laughing. And she said, "You are Palestinian?" And I said, "Yes." "You are a Muslim?" And I said, "Yes." Then she said, "Why you have a kippah?" And I said, "Well, I'm a spokesperson for our organization and I go to synagogues. And I respect Judaism, so I wear kippah sometimes, especially when I go to synagogues." Then she's like, become a different person totally. It took me like 5 minutes to pass. That's it. That was the key. Then I realized how our politics are based in emotion, in fear, in stereotypes. Our life is based on that, in anger, in suffering, that has become an ideology that design politics where we live. And that's why I'm here. The first 10 minutes, when you listen to Hanan as a Palestinian, you want to leave the room. But if you are able to sit and listen to the complete truth and the complete journey, then you don't want to leave that room, never, ever. And it's all about patience. It's all about being wise, being deep, to be able to understand the other without giving up your right. And that's why today we have violence. There is no space for people to express their fears and their suffering and their anger just on the street. And I believe that violence is not the consequences of hatred. Violence is the result of suffering and fear. And I experienced that by myself. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here for being a victim or giving presentation about victimhood. I'm not here to complain. I'm not here to raise guilt or punishment. I'm not here to be part of this competition of suffering, who suffers more, because we all suffer. But I'm here to tell you a story. And not just to tell a story. A story that has created a whole identity of a nation. And for me, telling you the story is so important, because if you understand that story, for sure, you will become 100%, 80, 90% convinced that we can solve this problem. Because this is an example of millions of Palestinians. So I grew up as a refugee. When Israel was created, my father became a refugee. My family has been thrown out of our village, Kibebak, Lachish today. And my father has to carry himself and his kids to move around, trying to survive. Part of my sisters and brothers, until today, they live in Jordan. And even when I and my brothers and sisters buried our parents, they were not able to come from Jordan to bury their parents. Just imagine how hard it is. Leave politics, leave identity, leave anything. Just imagine how hard it is to get married in Jordan without your parents are able to come to your wedding, and then when they die, you are not able to bury them. That's part of my identity, and that's part of my story. I grew up with that narrative, and that was Israel for me, and these are the Jewish people. Tell my father to be a refugee. Then after that, I was born in a hard environment that life conditions, normal life conditions were not there. As a child, I always wanted to travel, to go wherever, to study, to go to university. I was not allowed, especially because I was a son of a mother who has become one of the leaders of PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. And my mother was arrested many times. I saw her get beaten in front of my eyes by the Israeli Shabak intelligence officers in my home in the middle of the night. I'm not a politician. I'm not a terrorist. I was not born to hate anyone. But I saw my mother get beaten in front of my eyes. What you will feel. And sometimes wherever I go to speak, people ask me, especially Jewish people, they say, you Palestinians, educate your kids to hate. I promise you, if you live in the West Bank with these conditions, I'm not sure you need to go to school and to have curriculum for hatred. It makes the job for you. By the way, in the Palestinian schools, at least in the West Bank, I'm not talking about Gaza, at least there, talking politics is forbidden by the Palestinian Authority. But I know that you don't know that. So I grow up in a home that talk politics, speak politics, eat politics, breathe politics, everything was politics. And being a son of that mother and a son of that family means to be under threat 24 hours. You never know when the army will come or whom they will arrest. For years, we have never had dinner together because one or more of one of us was in prison. So you feel you are growing under that system and you want to scream for the injustice against you as a child. Many times I felt that it's a guilt to be born as a Palestinian. Just imagine, it takes you 3 hours sometimes to reach your school. 3 hours as a child, where you go on the street, checkpoints, tear gas, you lost your bag, and even when you arrive to your school, the army can enter the village any minute, then you leave your classes and you start playing. The play of death, throwing stones. That was my childhood. My childhood when I saw my sister, 14 years old, becoming a mother because my mother was in prison. And she struggled with us. She's just a child like us, but she has to be a mother. When I saw my other sister, 7 years old, crying, she wants her mother. This is a story of a human being who has become under control of anger totally. But he didn't become a fanatic. I went out to the street, 1987, I started throwing stones, and honestly, I was not a violent person. Because throwing stone in a 60-ton Merkava tank, you are not aiming to kill someone. It's even insane. But on the other hand, that stone can kill someone. It's a very complex, it's very complicated to explain. It was the human being inside me who wanted to scream that I deserve rights. And I don't want to be a killer. But I don't want to be a victim of anyone. This story you don't read in the news. You don't experience if you live here. So I grow up, then I was arrested with my mother in 1990, and the Shabak has cut a promise. If I don't give information about my mother, they will throw me in the prison for 10 years. And I remember myself telling that Shabak agent, you cannot put me to prison because I throw stones. People go to prison for 1 month, 6 months, 1 year. Then he said, if you will not give these informations, because your mother, like you, under hard torture. Then I refused, because I wanted to save her, but I didn't know many information. I was 18 years old. Then when in the military court with the 3 judges decide to give me 10 years to prison, I was totally broken. Again, I felt the injustice. And I'm going to spend the best 10 years of my life in prison because I throw stones. Because I was trying to scream that I exist and I deserve to exist normally and to live normally. Then I went to prison and I couldn't deal with it. But I didn't know that I was going to one of the best universities that you can imagine. Because Palestinian political prisoners, by that time, were mostly professors, doctors, the most educated people, because they are the leadership of the society. Especially Palestinians in the first Intifada, they didn't use weapon that much, like the second one. So it was like mostly a mass national political movement. So I found myself becoming part of that system, which is based in 5 committees: education, management, security, negotiation, and national committee. And I become so involved and busy, reading, learning languages. Big part of my English comes from there. My Hebrew, which has become like my Arabic, comes from there. And I was writing to my friends outside that I apologize because I cannot be in touch with you because I have no time. It was weird to them. How come you are in prison and you have no time? How come? But this is the reality. And the first place that I felt dignity and even respect by the Israelis, that was in prison. Because they look at us because of that system and they admire us. No one was allowed to swear even. I did it once, I washed the dishes for 3 days. It's a very respectful, educated system that raises you to become a better person. And after 3 years, 1993, I wanted to visit my mother in her other prison. And Israel refused. So I decided, me and her, to go for a hunger strike. And then I start a very hard journey, struggling and starving every day for 17 days until finally I achieved that, to visit her. And that was my first encounter with nonviolence, where I realized that I was blind to the best weapon that I can use to achieve my rights, which is my humanity. Not by attacking anyone, not by creating a threat on anyone, and not by legitimizing my act against anyone by considering it as a legitimate right to freedom. It's by encountering myself, challenging myself, that do I want to be right or do I want to succeed? That was my big lesson. Then I start learning about Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mandela. Then Oslo Peace Agreement has started. We supported the agreement deeply as leaders, especially as Fatah party. Then we were released in 1994. And we become full of hope. And our mission as ex-prisoners actually was to build the whole constitutions for the Palestinian Authority, this is the only place where you find ex-prisoners building a country. But this is what happened. I become a high officer for the Palestinian Security Forces. Then suddenly, I start arresting Palestinians who participate in violence. And I was one of them just a few weeks ago in prison, believing in my right in any way. But I think we really wanted to switch from revolution to citizenship. Means that being a Palestinian and serving our identity and nationality should not be by fighting Israel, should be by supporting the peace process. On the other hand, we were challenged. I'm telling you the truth. We were challenged by the continuation of the military Israeli occupation on the ground. In one hand, you arrest Palestinian, you put them to prison. On the other hand, you drive your car, an 18-year-old soldier in one of these checkpoints can slap you on your face. I felt shame to be part of that system. Other thing is the corruption of big part of that authority that raise more anger and more despair. You know, we have to say the truth. If we are meaning to reconcile, we have to say the truth. We cannot blame Israel for everything. There is so much homework and guilt within our society. We have to be truthful if we want really to create strong values for any solution. So part of it was us. Third, you know, as Israelis and Palestinians, this conflict is a good market for outsiders. So many other countries and parties start investing in the conflict, not in the solution, supporting extremism. Start from Iran to part of this Congress in this country. Because there is an interest for this conflict to keep going. Fourth, there was no reconciliation process. I mean, how can you sign a piece of paper and you expect peace? Between two nations who were victimized deeply, full of hate, anger, without even creating normal conditions for their life. We didn't know each other. Peace always is to draw border. But I'm not sure this is peace. It's not about drawing borders. Peace, in my opinion, is to be engaged with the other, because it's a very tiny piece of land that we were both have the only place to exist. So it has to be a joint management by designing political environment that will guarantee two truths to fit with dignity, with respect, with recognition on the ground. And this cannot be achieved without knowing each other. What is Judaism? What the Holocaust is? We didn't know. What is the Nakba, the catastrophe? What is 1948? We are afraid to open these issues because we will feel guilt. But I think the minute we open these issues, we will heal. If we want to heal. Because you know, fear, ignorance, sometimes make us feel good. Because I used to say, I grew up carrying one nation in my shoulder. After my journey in reconciliation, I have to pick up another nation. And they are both heavy, I promise you. So the whole process has collapsed in 2000. More violence, suicide bomber, tanks, Air Force, and new behavior. People have lost their hope even before the Intifada. So one day, after we decide not to take any act, because our political mind was convinced that using arm against Israel is a suicide. It's not the right action to take. And nothing to do with Israelis, from a political point of view. But one day, I was badly wounded in my knee, and I was sent to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment. And after 1 month, I received the news that my older brother Yusuf, 31 years old, was stopped by a group of Israeli soldiers and very violently murdered. Yusuf was trying to go back home, and there was an argument with a soldier. After that soldier threw stones on him, he started arguing with him. That cost him his life. He shot him 70 centimeters away from his head, and he killed him. And Yusuf was not a fanatic. He was not engaged in any violence. Actually, Yusuf used to work that time in Keren Kamet, in the Jewish National Fund. And he had Israeli friends. He was such a beautiful father with 2 kids. And he's not there. And my brother didn't die in a car accident. My brother didn't die because he was a terrorist. Even the officer of that unity took the soldier weapon and slapped him on his face. And there was a investigation committee, there was a court after 3 years that court said that the soldier was in danger. And they closed the file. And I have to deal with that and keep my humanity. Keep calm. Keep to be normal. How come? How can I? After all what I have been through now, my best friend, my best brother, is losing his life in the most unjust way. How can you deal with that? I'm a human being. I'm not saint. And the first thing, when this happened to any human being, the first thing you think about is revenge. And I thought, if it's about revenge, this wound is so deep and this pain is such huge. What could be the hugest pain that I have to cause someone to deal with that pain? What could be the hugest punishment that I have to create on someone to create justice? And what is justice? The only just solution for my loss is to bring him back to his kids. So there is no justice. And I remember Malcolm X, while I was studying in prison, he said, justice is just us. We should not expect justice. We should act in a just way. So I was struggling, telling myself, well, this is legitimate. I have the right to take revenge. And these people are killers. They did all of that to me, to my family. I should take revenge. And I said, if it's about killing also, how many Israelis, how many dead people I have to create to deal with that pain? How many Israeli mothers has to cry to realize that my mother didn't deserve to cry? This is something that you didn't read in newspaper when you learn about the conflict. 70% of the suicide bombers, most of them are not religious, they come from bereaved families. You can learn that. It's mostly a personal revenge. Then I realized that there is no revenge. I promise you, I'm willing to give up anything that you can imagine. Anything. Not just my land, everything I will give up just to bring him back to his kids. Because his life worth everything for me. Because I'm a human being and I respect my life and others' life. But when you lose the taste of your life, you lose your fear to die. And you stop caring about anyone. You become angry in yourself, on your family, in your nation, on your enemy. You are angry against everyone. But you are not able to take action because you are a human being. You are not a killer. I'm not a killer. Where can I find this justice? How can I find a reason to open my eyes next morning and to still want to live or to have words to tell to his kids? What shall I tell them? So I was stuck. 1 year after, we received the most strange phone call from a man, a religious Israeli father, a Jewish father, calling us to say that there is a group of Israeli parents who have lost someone in the conflict, and they want to visit us and to pay condolences. And they are deeply understand our right and our pain. For me, that was shocking. This is not the language that you hear in checkpoints or in the news. This is not the face of Israel. It was shocking to me when my mother agreed to host them. And in 2001, they came, and we have to take them around because the army blocked the whole village for 3-4 years. And it was shocking to me for the first time in my life, 2001. I was born in 72. It was shocking to see for the first time an Israeli crying. I couldn't imagine that Jewish people have tears. And suddenly, you see a victim, and you are not the only victim. And you see someone that we killed, his son or his daughter, willing to come and to go beyond hatred. And that meeting has transformed me totally, and not just me. My mother brought the mayor of Beit Umar, of my town, brought many bereaved families, and she took a delegation of bereaved parents from both sides next year to the United Nations, and she put me in the most complex, painful, hard direction in life to reconcile. She passed away, but I still feel her in every single step that I do. She passed away as a consequence of what happened to my brother. And if I'm able to do all of that, I think everyone can. I start becoming peace activist, non-violence activist, and believe me, it's headache. It's hard. And then I spend years traveling around the world, going to conferences, meeting politicians, congressmen, senators, going to the House of Lords, where I discover facts, how people deal with our conflict also from outside. How politicians, lords, sit in the same room where they invited me to speak, and they don't sit with each other because there is the pro-Israel lords and the pro-Palestine lords. And then they don't talk to each other because they are pro-us. I remember myself saying, can't you be pro-solution? What are you expecting? One of us is going to disappear or give up his rights? But I have news for you. Both of us will fight until the last drop of blood, because this is the only way and the only place, for both nations to exist there, over there. We don't want to go to anywhere. Actually, we don't have anywhere to go. Worse than that, no one wants us. The Arabs don't want us. Maybe the whole world don't want the Jews. I don't know. This is the only place for us to live. You don't have to be Mandela to realize that. So I found myself, after many years, realizing that I'm talking to the good ones, lefties from Tel Aviv, nice peace cafes, going to 5-star peace conferences, being part of these nice organizations who create dialogue. We sit and we eat hummus together, we hug each other, and we call it peace. This is not peace. I realized recently that even the peace movement live in a bubble. Peace is not to make people feel good or to act nicely, because they cannot. Peace is to change life conditions. Dialogue is not the comfortable place between friends to agree. Dialogue, actually, in my opinion, is the secure place for argument. If we can secure our argument, we will feel secure to agree. So I found myself coming to Gush Etzion area, creating a Palestinian non-violent center, which is insane, because I'm surrounded with all of these settlements and settlers. And for me as a Palestinian, even though that's my family land, but we have no right to do anything there. Not to build, not to have water, not to have electricity, nothing. This is a fact. And for me, thinking to go there and to do any peaceful activity, this is insane. Many of my friends told me that I have lost my mind. Then I found myself bringing actually a donkey, and we were alone. And next month, meeting people that I have never expected that I will meet them or finally stand in front of you talking with them in one voice. These are the last people that I should talk with regarding our reality. And since 2 years until today, in that tiny piece of land, I received more than 12,000 people from all over the world. Politicians, delegations, religious groups. And we received 3,000 of them were kids before they go to the army. For the first time, they find a place to meet a Palestinian as a human being. And then found myself for the last few years going to people who disagree with me. I was invited by Al-Aqsa Murder Brigades. 70%, 75% of the suicide bombers comes from that brigade. They called my office and they told the staff that they want to meet me in Jenin. I went. There was an Italian crew making a documentary. Then they found it sexy to come and film them killing me. Because of this, we have documents for that meeting. And I found myself sitting with 60 wanted people, the most wanted armed Palestinian from the West Bank, talking to me 4 hours, shouting, crying. And finally, their leaders, Zakaria Zbeidi, it's not a secret because it's in that film, coming and telling me, I'm so proud to belong to the same nation that you belong to. And after 1 year, they signed an agreement not to fight anymore. And they gave all of their weapons to the Palestinian Authority. But since that time until now, 25 of them were assassinated by the Shabak. It's easy to judge, but it's so hard to understand. You cannot imagine how politics over there are ugly. How politicians, when they adopt our suffering and fear, and they become managers of them for their benefits, it's dirty. So I found that peace is to create a national movement on the ground to force, to push, to encourage these politicians to come and sit on a table and take courageous steps toward peace. But we are traumatized. We are traumatized. The two nations are traumatized. I'm not sure that we will be able to force our politicians to that table, because we are complaining and punishing each other. I'm tired of that game. That's why today I'm creating also, with roots, I'm creating a Palestinian national non-violence movement. I want to show to the whole world that thousands of Palestinians will be marching peacefully in the street, saying that non-violence is our identity. This is a big, huge project that we are building, me and many other community leaders on the ground. And I believe that the minute that the painful price of peace will become cheaper and acceptable than the terrible price of war, we will have peace. Thank you.
Thank you. What we want to do now is two things. We want to take about 5 minutes to tell you actually what we're doing on the ground, what we're accomplishing, and then in the time remaining there'll be opportunity for questions and answers. So the piece of land that you've just heard us talk about, owned by Ali's family in the heart of Gush Etzion, is now the host of two very, very important movements. One is called Change, and that's the Palestinian nonviolent movement that is creating a new identity in the Palestinian street. And the second movement hosted on this piece of land is Roots, in Hebrew Shorashim, in Arabic Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding Nonviolence and Transformation. And what we believe in Roots is that the two peoples, Palestinians and Israelis, are not ready for peace because we don't see each other. We don't recognize each other. We have no idea of the identity and the story, the narrative of the other. We don't know how they live, what makes them tick, or what they think, what their aspirations are. So we bring people together to listen to each other, to look at each other, to hear each other, to eat together, to talk together. Among the programs that we have, number one, family meetings, like the event that changed my life, which turns out to have been the founding event of Roots. In addition to family meetings, we have women's groups. We have children's groups. We have a photography workshop for kids from both sides. And we have a summer camp. Our third annual summer camp will be this summer in the northern Israeli city of Akko. We're taking 25 Palestinians, 25 Israelis to a week summer camp to see each other, to play together, to understand each other, to do trauma, dialogue, exercises together. Therapy, actually, is what it is. In addition to that, Ali mentioned the program of working with the Israeli pre-military academies. And like you said, about 3,000 kids between high school and the army in their gap year have come to us for 99.9% of them the first time meeting a Palestinian, for 90% the first time meeting a settler, and meeting the two of them together. Sometimes it's Ali and I, sometimes other representative Roots. It's really, really, really transformative. It really is. And these are kids another few months are going to be in the army, interacting with Palestinians. And clearly they're going to interact a little bit better, a little bit more humanely after they've experienced our program. The other part of our program is working with local army units. The Alufa Pikud, in English, the general in charge of all of the West Bank, has been to our programs in plain clothes with his staff to see what we're doing. And we are getting great support behind the scenes in our work. Army officers being brought to meet Palestinians, to understand who they are. We also have interfaith dialogue programs, both among laymen and laywomen, as well as interfaith dialogue in the highest levels of rabbinic and Muslim and Christian leaders. Some stuff that's so top secret, I can't even say the names of the people involved, but there's names that you might recognize. What else did I miss, Ali? That's mostly it. And as we close and go to the questions and answers, we want to tell you that there's ways that you can hear more about us. There's ways you can get involved. Number one, we have a website, friendsofroots.net. Look at the website, friendsofroots.net. There's some material here on the table. We have here tonight 3 of our volunteer staff in LA working with us, Stephanie and Jeff and Ilanit is someplace. At least Stephanie and Jeff, you could come up afterwards if you want to talk to them and ask about what we're doing. On the website, you can sign up for our newsletter 4 or 5 times a year to hear about the work that we're doing. And if you're really, really interested, you can join the Friends of Roots in LA. We're building an organization in this city as well as many other cities that's bringing our message to the U.S., building coalitions of Jews, Christians, and Muslims to come together with this message of reconciliation. And if you're able to support us financially or with your time, with the essence of who you are, you can send us money on the website. You can send us yourself or your children to come and intern with us there on the ground where it really counts. You could work here in LA in building this organization that's helping and supporting us. And I guess that's it. So.
Why don't you take that mic over there? So we have about 15 minutes for questions. Just as a friendly reminder to all of those who are here with us, questions end in question marks, and they typically begin with words like what, who, how, and when, and they don't begin with words like don't you know, or how come you can't X, Y, or Z. They're general interrogative statements that want to learn more information as opposed to accusations that try to not learn more information. So please raise your hands and we'll go around. Doug, why don't you go first? Alana's walking around with the mic, and I'm going to give you this one to answer.
My question has to do with historical narratives. The question that I have for each of you is, are the people in your community prepared to recognize the legitimacy of the claim of the other to the same piece of real estate? Because when I hear the story of you guys, it sounds to me like you got 2 sets of people with valid claims to the same piece of real estate. So how does your community recognize the legitimacy of his story, and how does your community recognize the legitimacy of his story?
You remind me by the story of this country. 230 years ago, there was no America, right? And now, this young country has become the most powerful country on the planet. Am I right? So I think, how do we do it? By 2 things. One, knowing each other, learning about each other. The other thing, which is more powerful, is to imagine the benefit from this recognition of the 2 truths. Which means, if the Israelis and the Palestinians will recognize each other and to the legitimate truth of each other on one land, and design, a political design will guarantee this man's rights and my rights, I think we will be the most powerful country, or 2 countries, doesn't matter, on the Middle East. That's what I believe. So I don't want, you know what? The narrative can divide us from here to the moon. And this is legitimate. 2 nations who become against each other in every single even step in the history. It doesn't fit. And that's why I see that the Jewish story to this land is true, and my story is true. I don't want to be stuck in the past. Whomever was, the Indian was here, I don't want to be stuck there. And I know that the new generation is thirsty for solution. And that's why part of my education in the West Bank with these Israeli kids also, to tell them, don't be responsible about the past. This past is gonna victimize you. Be responsible about the future. This is the fact I'm dealing with. Otherwise, our history will just cause us to kill each other forever.
Yes, right here in the front. 1 and then 2. There's a mic coming over here.
So firstly, Ali, I wanted to thank you for the courage that it must take to come to these synagogues and speak out with Hanan. I came in wanting to be argumentative, so thank you very much. I came in wanting to be argumentative, so thank you very much. But my question to you is not about the narrative, more about the financial viability and my concern with the circumstances under which the Palestinians do exist. And how do we create a solution that they feel? I think the Palestinians become the victim of the Arab society or the UN, and there's so much motivation from on top to not have a solution. How do you suggest that the people rise above that and help make the dialogue greater? I'm sure the solution may be on the Israeli side too. I'm not taking a side. I'm not blaming who it is. But you were talking about the conditions under which you grew up. Thank you.
Thank you for this. What's your name? Thank you. It's an important question. But I think if you or anyone think that we are the victims of the Arabs or the United Nations, did that what you said? I think if you feel like that, so save us. Save us. Bring us to be your partner. We are thirsty for that, I promise you. These settler houses, we built them by our hands. ISIS, Daesh cannot fit in our society. They couldn't. But they took over countries, armed armies, Daesh pit them. But in the West Bank, where it's the best environment for hatred, they couldn't fit because we are not fanatic. We need you. We need Israel. Israel needs us to be its gate to the whole world today. Let's be clever to build this partnership. That's my answer.
Hello. You said before that there is a certain, there are reasons that politicians, governments want to keep the conflict going. And I would like to hear something more about what is the gain in keeping the conflict going.
I'll try to be short because this is such a big question. The majority of both sides are acting as victims. Any politicians who will run election and to win, he has a lot to do with that victimhood by raising it, by telling people and victims what they like to hear, not by challenging them to solve that victimhood. That's why if you are an ex-prisoner in Palestine who spent 30 years in prison, even if you never went to university, you will become a parliament member. Because we vote from here. We don't vote from here. If you was a general in the army and you call and you talk and you act from a security background, in Israel, people will vote for you because you have credit. This is one. The other thing is, to build peace, you need courage. You know, to do what we are doing, you need to be ready to face any reality, any question, any person, any identity. Politicians has one face because they cannot be clever to empathize with the different faces because they are politicians. They speak in one language. We don't speak in one language. We speak in one voice, but in different languages. That's why peace is to create an environment for difference to fit, not to find the common. Our politicians are not doing that. Our politicians are doing the opposite of that. Third, I know it's also business. If you want people to support you, talk with fear, talk with anger, talk with resistance, talk with defense, because they will support you. That's why we are here. We are here to tell you, push your politicians, write even to Hamas, I don't care. I need your voice to Hamas. Embarrass them in front of the whole world. You Jews, you know, I was giving a presentation in Tel Aviv, and an Israeli man, very clever man, he said, you know, all what you say I cannot even argue with it. But why you don't also create a non-violence movement, not just against the occupation, it's also against Hamas? And I said, wow, why don't you do that? It seems it doesn't register. Because there is the Israeli army, they can take care of it because there are the politicians and they will take care of us. This is the consequences of our both politicians. What are we facing today? This is the consequences. We have to judge them. We decide for them in one day, but they decide for the rest of our life for us. We have to draw for them a red line. Organizations will not be able to do that. Initiatives will not solve the conflict. It has to be a national movement, national pressure, where you as a Jew will stand to say, sacrificing another nation, it's not my security. Where me, I have to stand saying stabbing, shooting, suiciding is a crime against humanity. It doesn't matter where you come from or against whom. Violence is a crime, and that's it. Stop giving us excuse. This is what it has to be our language with our politicians. But we I just came from APAC. APAC, I have to say it right. APAC. I spoke at the APAC. Okay? I was listening to people there, my heart was bleeding. They are so blind. I'm sorry, I'm not judging. Like going to an Islamic conference in Qatar. The same. Then I suggest to them and I said, listen, I'm stuck, I'm confused. Jewish people in J Street, Jewish people in APAC. And both invite me to speak about peace. Why don't you create JPAC?
Over here, Tamar.
Thank you once again. I just wanted to know, you talked a lot about emotion and reaction, but I'm just curious, in your communities, how people are reacting to you. Obviously, in this audience, people are clapping, and many people seem to agree with you, and I know I do, but I'm just curious what reaction you get in your community, and specifically in what I would see, or many Jews see in America, as this kind of right-wing Israeli community.
I've heard a lot of people say that from America, American Jews, you can't understand what's going on. You have to come to Israel. Let those people involved tell you what's really going on. I think just the opposite. I think the closer you are to the conflict, the lesser you see. Because you could know what's going on by reading the newspaper. But when you're there, you don't just know what's going on, you feel what's going on. You're hurt, you're wounded, you feel that you're bleeding, you know the people that have been killed. And therefore, most of the reactions are emotional. And we're blinded by what we're feeling. So indeed, you're right. It's very, very, very hard for my community to hear what we're saying. It's hard to open up your heart to the other when you're bleeding. But we've had great success. And that gives me an opportunity to tell you one of the methodologies of our success, which I forgot to mention earlier. In the past 6 months, it's been hard to get Palestinians and hard to get Israelis to our programs because people are full of fear. So if they don't come to us, we come to them. And that means speaking in Palestinian schools on the one hand, but what I want to tell you about is our program of home meetings. It's now about once every other week in the settlements of Alon Shvut, Elazar, Tekoa, Efrat, Neve Daniel, Migdal Oz, myself or another Israeli, and Ali or another Palestinian, we come and speak to people who invited their neighbors. Sometimes it's 20 people, 30 people, 40 people. Once it was 45 people, even 50. They listen to the story you just heard. They listen to the Israeli reaction to the story. And yes, it's really hard for people to hear, and it's really challenging and offensive, but everyone's respectful. Everyone listens. There's a lot of argumentation, especially after Ali leaves. But there's always 20, 30% that say we're on board. They give us their email addresses, they come to more programs, they become activists. And there are certainly thousands of people on my side, in Gush Etzion, Jews, settlers, who are now willing to listen and be part of this.
I will just, well, if I am invited by Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, this is a sign about how the rest feel with it. And I think the majority of the Palestinian community are not engaged in action, but they are stuck with anger and suffering daily. They want a practical peace to identify it with. They don't want a peaceful speech in their refugee camp. This will not serve their right. Let's speak the truth. Why Palestinians are engaged. The other thing, people are afraid of normalization. You know, the anti-normalization movement. Because we are not equal. This is the situation. We are not equal. So people are afraid of guilt. And sometimes many Israeli peace organizations consider dialogue as a final step, and that's it. I want to have a group of good Palestinians, then I will dialogue with them, and that's it. But the Palestinians finish with that dialogue, they go back to their community, and they get humiliated in checkpoints. That's what I experienced. I took a group of Palestinian bereaved mothers, swear to God. They were humiliated in a checkpoint. I took them to meet Israeli bereaved mothers. Can you imagine what will happen to a mother who will experience that? So what are we talking about now? A practical peace, not just a dialogue. To change life condition. This is how Hamas act. Hamas acted not as a political party. They act as a society, doing social services without any political change, and they succeed. They adopted the anger and the suffering. This is what we need to learn to do. That's my philosophy for serving peace. And finally, I'm not expecting Mandelas to come out of settlements or Gandhis to come out of refugee camps. People are hurt. People are bleeding. But I'm telling you, there is enough despair to create hope. There is enough pain to create change. Because this despair can be our best material for change if we know how to adopt it and how to use it. That's why Palestinians listen to me. Because I don't blame them. I don't go to punish them, to blame. I go and I understand where this pain comes from. That's why settlers open their doors to me. Without giving them legitimacy, I'm not the one to decide political facts, who belong to where. But I'm there telling them, I recognize and respect your legitimate right to this land, but it should not be built on the shoulder of my nation. Let's find together a way. That's all what I say. That's why people listen. Believe me, they are thirsty. The majority are thirsty for solution. That's why we create this initiative, and that's why I create this movement. The minute that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians will be in the street non-violently, real revolution will be in Tel Aviv. I'm sure of that. Without this, I have doubt that we will achieve any change. Yes, please. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
So, Ali, good to see you. You were at my house for Rosh Hashanah last year. I respect everything you both are doing. I wanted to tell you that when I was 6 months old, I was exiled out of my country, Iran. And so were my parents, both of them. And we were forced to leave to Israel. So I actually wanted to start by saying that back in 1947, the Palestinian Arabs, because there are also Palestinian Jews if we are to match facts and facts, were offered a state and declined. That was not the first time that they were offered a state. They were offered a state by the Turkish mandate and also by the English mandate. I understand, I'm getting there, sorry. You keep talking about a nation and ideologies. I'd like to know two questions. Number one, what ideology do you stand for? What is your nation? Because my mother and father have a claim to their land that was taken away by Khomeini, basically. So they also have a claim. I'd like to know what ideology you have that you're claiming, number one. And number two, how do you propose to change what Palestinians that are extremists, do? Because basically Hamas was elected, if I'm not mistaken, right? So the change has to come from inside of you. So you're preaching to the choir, talking to us, but I'd like to hear from you. Sorry.
Wow. How much time we have? I think it's gonna be the last question. You know what? Every issue of refugees is against the international law. It should not be refugees. This is the culture of human being. Because it should not be statehood. Alivai, in Hebrew they say alivai, that there are no borders. But there are borders. Alivai, there is no extremism. But there is extremism. These are the facts that we are dealing with. Whatever your background is, it's not about that. I will stand against any injustice and against any human being. It doesn't matter who you are, if you come from Iran or from Syria. And I believe that not just the Jews, the Muslims has been victimized more by Saddam Hussein. Am I right? Yeah. By Assad. The Arab Islamic countries are not the best model for democracy. The Western policy toward the Arab nations is not the best democratic policy. These are the consequences. Daesh are the consequences of bringing down Saddam Hussein because Bush decided that. Then you bring down a dictator. I am supporting that, but you raise fanatics. That's why ISIS are good in war, because they are trained. Generals from the Saddam army, from Libya army. This is not the Arab Spring, it's the Arab winter against the Arabs. So if you feel a victim as a Jew of the Iranian, you are right, but there are millions of Muslims has become victimized of Muslims. Secondly, if we were offered a state, I will tell you, even BLO was not created by the Palestinians. It was created and founded by the Arabs. By the Arabs, Ahmed al-Shuqairi, the Egyptian. BLO. And I think instead of asking that question, there is I will tell you. Because of BLO, actually, when Palestinians took over BLO, Israel today have a peace agreement with Jordan. Israel today had a peace agreement with the Palestinians. It fell because of many reasons that I'm not there to discuss. I told you my opinion why Oslo peace agreement has failed. And I believe today, whomever the Palestinians, if you are a Palestinian, that a country give you to another country, a country give you to another country, an occupation to another occupation, I'm not sure that the Palestinian were in a situation to heal for just to breathe, to take right decisions. Okay? When the Palestinians when the Palestinians consider Israel in 1947 as an occupier, I'm not sure by that time Palestinians were ready to accept any offer, or they should be. But today, I believe that the lesson was hard for both of us. And what will bring me to answer your third question. When we talk about Hamas and others, I also talk about Stern, Balmach, Haganash, Eitzel. All of these organizations are not non-violence organizations. Okay, let's say the truth. Many Palestinian blood has been wasted because of that. When Israel was created, I'm not sure that was a rosy road. Both sides, by themselves and by the other and by the others, has paid prices in the history. So today, we have a choice. We have a choice. Whether to keep this behavior and mentality that will cause us death every day. That's why our kids are dying. That's why this man, when he walk in Gush Etzion, he's not safe. That's why I'm here and I'm not sure what will happen to my family. I cannot live with these statements as long as I live there. If I was living here, maybe it's easier for me. But there, I think there is a fact. Millions of people are over there today. It's not our destiny to keep dying. You are right. You know what? You are 100% right. For the history, the Palestinians are the one to blame. The Iranians are the one to blame. Hamas is the one to blame. What do you do? What do you do? As a Jew, what I will do? That's the question. I don't want to be blind by my victimhood in the history. The whole people, the whole nations has victimized the Jewish people. When the whole world said, we didn't know, what do you feel? That you are the victims of the whole world. When the Arab refused, or when Iran used us, when Saddam Hussein, Ibn Laden used us, we feel the same. But when the unjust political role by Bush to bring down Saddam and to fight there, over there, and when it comes to the Middle East, God didn't speak to him about that. God came to him when he was sleeping, just telling him about Iraq. And I don't want to be the victim of anyone. I think I have a partner. I believe in that partner. And I believe that we can change. I cannot change the history. I'm sorry. I cannot. But for sure, we can change the future. Whether you join it, whether I'm gonna be hard, and I'm sorry. I'm gonna be hard and I'm sorry again. Whether you join it or please leave us alone, we will manage. Leave us alone.